Hey everybody, here we go again. I got a couple of requests for a video that explains the structure of the GRE. So let's go ahead and take care of that now. So as you see here, I've got some columns set up for you, some rows and columns. We'll talk about section type, the number of questions in each section, the time you have for that section, the average amount of time per question, the score range, and the intervals of your score. I guess up here I could add average time per question, so I'll put that in here. Average time per question. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to write your issue essay. I'll have a video on that very soon. Obviously the essay is just one question. You get 30 minutes to write about it. Average time per question, well, that's not necessary here. And then the score range is 0 to 6 in half-point intervals. And if you go on the GRE website, you can see how those essay scores play out. So an essay score of 6 is 99th percentile, 5.5 is 98th, and then it goes down from there. The next thing you're going to have is you're going to have your argument essay, where you analyze an argument and tell us, what it's missing, what else you would have to hear, and those sorts of things in order to make a decision. Again, that's one question, 30 minutes. Score range 0 to 6, intervals 0.5. Now the next, 5 sections here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One thing you need to know is that they can be in any order. So I'm going to give it to you in one order, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the order that you get it in, right? So these 5 sections can be in any order. All right. So first things first, let's get what's called the experimental out of the way. So let's, up here I'm going to put experimental, math or verbal, because you don't know whether your experimental is going to be math or verbal. It's going to look like any other question, right? Any other section, excuse me. As usual, it's going to have 20 questions because both the math and verbal tests have 20 questions per section. If it's math, then it'll be the math length of 35 minutes. If it's verbal, then it'll be the verbal length of 30 minutes. And again, depending upon whether it's math or verbal, you might have 1.75 minutes per question, or you might have 1.5 minutes per question. And then the score range is going to be 130 to 170, as it is with the math and the verbal sections, always in 1-point intervals. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark the rest of these up because they're all 130 to 170 in 1-point intervals. Okay. Now, the reason I got the experimental out of the way is because a lot of people forget that there is an experimental section on the GRE. When you take, the GRE power prep tests, they're not going to give you an experimental section, but there will be an experimental section on the test. So keep that in mind. You've got an extra 30 or 35 minutes on top that you're going to have to concentrate for, so you might want to factor that into your preparation. So, as I said, the experimental won't necessarily be here, but it could be anywhere in these 5, and so I just kind of wanted to get them out of the way. And then we go to verbal and math, so you're going to have 2 verbal and 2 math in any order. As we said before, they all have 20 questions. The amount of time you're going to have is going to depend, or the amount of time you have is going to depend on the type of section. So if it's verbal, it'll be 30 minutes. If it's math, it'll be 35. If it's verbal, you have 1.5 minutes per question. If it's math, you have 1.75. All right. And then finally, at the end of the test here, we've got basically just a research section, right? So let's take a look here. So research. And the amount of questions, it's basically an optional section. You know that it's not going to count toward the test, so you don't necessarily know how long it's going to take you or how many questions it's going to be, but it's going to be short. Don't worry about the research section. The one thing you do have to worry about is the experimental section, which means that you will either have 3 math and 2 verbal sections, or you'll have 3 verbal and 2 math sections. So you'll at least know by the end of the test which one of the sections was the experimental. Well, not precisely which one, but which type of section was experimental. So in other words, you'll know whether it was the verbal or the math, but you won't know which one it was. So unfortunately, if there's one section that went really poorly, all you can do is kind of cross your fingers and hope that it was the experimental section. So it looks like I made an extra column here, or an extra row, excuse me, at the bottom, but that's okay. Hopefully this was informative.